So,
I feel like I must be joined.
humans in the loop. Are humans in the loop the problem? Are they the security risk, or what are the other issues around humans in the place, in the connected places? So I want to invite my panel to discuss this, and I'm going to give them a sort of 3 or 4 minute stand to actually say their piece on it. So Chris Speed, I think you all know Professor Chris Speed. Chris is Chair of Design and Informatics. He's also Director of the Futures Institute at Edinburgh and of the Informatics...
Creative Informatics.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got a book with it all in, so I'm not going to read it all out. All right? Chris.
No, thank you. Thanks very much, Rachel. Nice to be with colleagues as well. I think what fascinates me as a designer, design informatics, just for context. Informatics, if you don't know, because it's a bit of jargon, is the study of the flow of information. And the School of Informatics Edinburgh is outstanding in AI, the data foundation, so on and so forth. But when design enters the flow of information, what's fascinated myself and colleagues across Petrus is how that creates value. Because I think what designers do is study of the flow of value and values. Sure, there's value created all the time if you connect data inputs into complex social, consumer-based or business-to-business systems, and it creates value. It might be economic value, but on the other hand, when designers get involved, you'll have to look out for the contraventions and the challenges. Now, when I think about the loop, I'm going to put this into one context because we're going to say loop throughout the morning, and my interpretation of the loop is what came along with software, which I think Petrus is wedded to, is the build, measure, and learn loop. And scientists and creatives, we're involved in this because we're constantly building things. We're hypothesizing, we're proposing into the Petrus thing for the last so many years, suggesting that one build may well elicit some measurement across which we'll learn something, and then we'll likely go again. Now, that loop then, what I'm fascinated, particularly with Mike's introduction, is where we've changed our relationship in that loop. Because the loop's getting more sophisticated. Heather Viltz talks about the idea of a digital assemblage, which is a series of object systems in that loop. Now, actually, as we think about the introduction of AI more recently, we find ourselves being threatened in that loop. Very early on, we were really in the middle of the loop. We had to perhaps turn switches and be part of systems. So design, as far as design informatics is concerned, is interested in particularly in this loop and how we change our relationship with it, on the assumption that, again, the study of the flow of data will construct value, but it will also put pressure on values.
Thank you very much. Now we have Rachel Harker, who's a technology consultant from Digital Jersey. Over to you, Rachel.
Hello, thank you everybody for having me. I describe myself as an applied technologist. I've been developing technology for too long now. I used to develop things, and then the Internet of Things came along, and so for the last 15 years I think I've been doing Internet of Things. I'm based in Jersey in the Channel Islands, which is a small island nation. We all have to have more than one job. One of the hats that I wear is consulting to Digital Jersey. We were gifted by the Heritage Organisation a very detailed LiDAR model of the whole island, which we used as the basis to start a digital twin. And we went around the island and we gathered various data sets from various organisations, and that was all very interesting. And then we realised that we were missing some crucial bits of data that would allow our digital twin to do some useful stuff. And one area where we're particularly interested in is mobility and modal shift, so that we can hit our net zero targets and make our population healthier and feel better. And so we realised we needed to generate some mobility data. So at the same time, we're also aware of this sort of idea of data trusts that people were starting to talk about. And we are the leading trust jurisdiction for financial trusts in the world. And we thought, well, we do trusts, couldn't we do data trusts? So we have developed a project that brings two of those things together. We've created what we think is the first legally constituted data trust in the world using Jersey's trust law. And we have brought together 500 local cyclists who've been recruited across the island to sort of provide full geographic coverage and different demographic profiles. And we've equipped them with IoT bike lights that pair with mobile phones using Bluetooth, as Mike mentioned. And they are cycling for the Trust, collecting data about their journeys, which we're now using to start looking at sort of the insights that we can generate about how we can improve our island infrastructure in relation to cycling. So I think I'm here to be the sort of practical voice of stuff that's happening in the world.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And Liz Varga. Liz is Professor of Complex Systems.
So, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So, my take on this humans in the loop makes me worried about stakeholders. So, my research is in infrastructure systems. So, I run an infrastructure systems institute in UCL. And there are a diversity of stakeholders in the infrastructure space. So we can think of users as a primary stakeholder. So I worry about their skills, about their capabilities, the knowledge they have access to, their learning about how the system works. And I think that is a research area that's under-investigated at the moment, particularly as we get more and more insights through the AI that's being translated by others. But you can also think of other stakeholders in the infrastructure system. So the operators, how do they make their decisions about what's most effective? Are they only worried about the economic effects? Obviously, we've got net zero, we've got resilience, we've got multiple targets that operators have to embrace. How do they deal with all the Internet of Things capabilities to deliver operational systems that sort of tick all the boxes? And have they got the right skills and capabilities and know-how to do that? Because particularly in infrastructure, we see an aging population. So where's the next generation of operators coming from that are going to help us deliver the right solutions? But then there are all the invisible stakeholders, perhaps not entirely invisible, but they play a massive role, but we don't think of them in the day-to-day. So the policymakers, the planners, the people that are making longer-term decisions about what infrastructure is provided and what capabilities that might then have for collecting data, for processing that, and all the privacy, security, trust and ethical concerns that are associated with that. How do they know at the time of their planning and policy making what will be coming in the next generation? I mean, it's just a massive area of uncertainty. So how can we future-proof that environment? And then I suppose I'd then worry about the people providing, the stakeholders providing these technical solutions. Where is the connect in the technologists to society? How do they make that leap to provide solutions that will be good for society? How do they make sure that there is reduced carbon? We see the creation of data centers that are processing, I can't remember that it's not terabytes anymore, we've got zettabytes or whatever they are, massive volumes of data. They are consuming so much energy and creating sustainability issues. But that's just by the by in many respects. My concern is about the skills and capabilities to transfer from the technologists into other stakeholders. So the human in the loop being the technologist to the user, to the operator. How do we get that connection stronger and address these sort of Petras issues? I think I could probably go on forever.
That's absolutely great. You started us off well.
Thank you.
So, let's just have a general discussion about flourishing places, flourishing people. How, in the light of what Mike's told us about where the technology is going, what are the challenges and opportunities? Do you want to start? Anybody want to start on that?
I quite like the context, actually, because I thought I like the role of the thinginess.
Thinginess. So, how do you make Jersey a really flourishing and sustainable and secure and healthy place?
Sorry, that was that's quite a big question. I don't know. I think in the Jersey context, we've got the point of our life cycle project is really it is one facet of this. It covers all these things. We've got these our sort of users for our data and our system are We've got net zero targets. We've got people worrying about CO2. We've got people worrying about the fact that we think we need to have 150,000 people on the island, where we've got 100,000 now in order to maintain our lifestyle, our sort of current standard of living within 20 years. So where are all the cars going to go? Where are all the houses going to go? We've got, health and well-being, all the usual challenges. We've got an ageing population. And really what we were trying to do with our little cycling project was really just to fight back a bit and give cyclists, we have some very specific challenges in Jersey. We have a very car-centric culture. We have 150,000 cars, 100,000 people on a 9 by 5 mile patch. It's insane. And then we have quite a lot of people who, for example, are cycling for commuting, but it's very dangerous for them. And there's this very big conflict between the two. And then we also have this sort of culture of quite a sort of, I think it's an island mentality where sort of, the trust in the government isn't there. Now, that may be across the board.
I'm not sure that's well, it is an island mentality. It's this island mentality,
well,
actually.
that may be. So we've got these challenges, all of these things coming together. And what's been sort of slightly fascinating is using this project, which started as if we could just generate some insights, that would be great to help us to think about how we could improve the infrastructure, starts throwing all sorts of questions up about how those different groups of people sort of the tensions between them. And actually, when you start to surface some of this information, you start to surface some of those tensions as well. As a cyclist, from a cyclist point of view, I see that we are already generating really good information that will help us to improve infrastructure, for example, and hopefully make some of these conflicts go away. But some of the stuff that has come up in the process has been quite fascinating, not least attitudes to the police.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the whole issue about sensors in places, understanding this is the sort of social bit, understanding what's the relevance of it. But then there's a whole issue, first of all, about, it comes back to your process. You put something in place, you make a decision. Who makes the decision to do that? And then what do they do with the data? And then how does that affect the individuals and the community's response to that? So we have a huge area here, both of the security of the technology, but also the security of society in the sense of responding to that. I mean, I don't know whether anybody in terms of...
Yeah, I mean, so for me, this is about the cycles in which we change.
Yeah.
So we're collecting data very much in a sort of right time mode now. It's almost real time in many situations. But how does that affect the right time decision making? So when we, certainly for infrastructure, we're thinking 30-year timescales. So to have data that's on a minute by minute scale is sort of not useful. I need to know bigger patterns than that to do the planning for the long term. But then how do we make our infrastructure adaptive to the most current insights into how people are using those systems? Because you want infrastructure to be delivering the services that are needed on a different time cycle basis from the collecting data to the long-term planning. So how do we bring those insights that we're collecting from data, assuming that we've protected them, we know that these are accurate insights and we've validated them somehow, and they're not misinformed by people who are sometimes deliberately interfering with that data? How can we get that into the right time cycle for planning and decision making? And then how do we make infrastructure adaptive to take those insights and be multi-purpose or be able to create solutions which are better for society and for the outcomes that are needed? It's a massive, massive question.
Well, I'm going to riff off. I think both contexts are fascinating. So we're lucky enough to have brought two colleagues from the design informatics group, just because I think the two examples are very granular. Alexander Cole, if you nip upstairs later, you might get lucky to have a go with his robot Ma. Now, I put it into context. It was intended to go into care homes. That's absolutely the intention. But when you suggest that residents in a care home are about to be subjected to an instrumented environment, it's quite fearful, actually. Suddenly you say that your living rooms will be instrumented to look for your best healthcare interests. I mean, it's quite an invasive proposition. Actually, what Alexander's team have done is built a small companion robot that does gather data if you use it and you choose to hold it and perhaps keep it as a companion. But in doing so, it asks questions about the time of the end of life. So it's fascinating, Liz, this idea of when are we capturing data, how are we capturing it, and at what point in lives do we need that? Very different to the moment, I suspect, in traffic, which needs to be very instantaneous. Conversely, Billy's work is looking at two kettles. The two kettles are trying to align together with a balancing. If I turn my kettle on and Rachel happened to know, could we share the water, the hot water, and therefore, but in doing so, we share the data. So Billy's work, if you ask Billy to boil a kettle for you, you'll find these other contraventions in terms of, hey, we could save the time of energy and carbon, but we're going to have to share some data. Do you want to know when your neighbour has got hot water? So both projects, I think, deal in some ways at a very granular level with examples at which scale, energy, time, and thinginess get questioned.
Interestingly, do you think there's a lot of engineers and technologies in the audience, and we do get focused on the technology? I, as a sort of designer, are interested in the social implications, and because of this, AI has suddenly become, everybody's talking about it. Do you think the humans in the loop will start to really engage with this whole issue of what data is, how it's being used, and have to be more involved in their places so that they understand more about the decision making that's going on, the data that's going to come out in the future? Do you think more of the general population are going to be interested, or will they never care?
Yeah, so, I'll have a go at that. Again, it's another big question. I think it depends on where people get their data from and whether they trust that data. So many people will get data from social media, and we know in the past it's been less than trustworthy because there's motivations in the sort of social data that's out there. So how can people discriminate between what is good data and what is maybe not good data? So how can we get people to be more critical? And this is about getting their skills and capabilities up and being able to discern what they can rely on and what they can't rely on. And there's also this question of, I think this whole policy technology cycle, and it's not just about technology, it's also about behaviour. Yeah. So technology can nudge behaviour in the right direction. So if we can be informed about when to better use technology or when to use less technology or when not to use technology, is about what people actually do. So the right behaviours are not always the right technology answers. So people might want you to, for example, as an energy utility, I might want you to use more energy because it means I make more profits, therefore can invest better, adopt more renewables and so on. But actually, the best behaviour is to use less energy because then we don't emit carbon, we can do things differently. So how do we get that whole behaviour technology loop and the person that's making that decision better informed about making the right decision and the most viable decision for society?
Well, I think the higher education, I mean, since, November, ChatGPT, flipping heck, the whole thing's just slammed into crisis. And I think principally my challenge for the question of the public is actually what they're doing is something that Fordism did 100 years ago. Fordism, it was just a business model, isn't it? At scale, it's a business model. We don't have to make cars according to the scale of small carriages with small workforces, building one at a time. We just scale up and use a production line. And that's what AI does, right? It's a business proposition. All of you, my proposition, my provocation, you will use it, and you do, you'd use it as a labour time-based saving tool, straight off the bat. So my students are using it, clearly because they didn't find enough time to write the essay. They're finding ways to quickly expedite certain decisions. So every time we use an AI, it's purely for a labour, economy, time-saving decision. And that, I think, then, because all the cloud infrastructures are invisible, any of our decision is not informed by social economic values, which means we'll keep hiring it because those are hidden and put aside, and it displaces any insight into the labour forces, again, the social and economic implications. So.
Interesting. Okay. How will places deal with this? How will local authorities deal with this exponential shift in technology? Rachel, have you got any thought on that? Just to put you on the spot there.
I think there is going to be an immediate struggle to keep up. They're already being offered a smorgasbord of solutions from commercial providers with probably not as much understanding as we would like them to have. And I guess in Digital Jersey effectively provides some of that capability to our local authority, which is the government of Jersey, it's the whole government. But I know from talking to them, for example, about the sort of response to AI, that it's a bit rabbit in the headlights, which, it's completely understandable. Yeah. It's complicated, isn't it? We've already got highly complex systems with highly, complex issues that we're discussing here. What happens when we layer generative AI on top of that, and these amplifiers? Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, at this point, I'm going to open up to the audience. Let's have a discussion with the audience. Have the audience got any questions or issues or challenges they want? Right. Okay.
God, look where we started.
We're talking to the panel and to each other, so it's not just a question to us. We've got questions all over the place. Well, let's start up there, come down, then go up, and we'll go across the room like that. I think save Sarah's feet. Yes.
Thank you for your talks. I just wanted to ask around consent. So we've got the idea of having loads of new AI and sensors being put into public spaces. London's already the place in the world with the most CCTV, and pretty much none of us consented for that to happen. So how do we communicate with the public about what is that data going to be used for, especially with policing, especially? I mean, I'm just a little concerned at how that communication and that dialogue happens.
Can we defend consent as an idea? I think we lost consent.
Well, I mean, there's informed consent when you actually write to people and say, do you accept that we will do this? But actually, when it's CCTV, there isn't that informed consent. But so it comes then down to the local authorities taking responsibility for how they will use that information. So we've worked with a number of district councils and local councils on traffic data. And so we know that they anonymise number plate information. So they collect it with ANPR. So we're interested in trip data. So how does a vehicle move throughout the day? And if we just get a snapshot of where the vehicle is, it's no use to us because we want the end-to-end journey over the whole day, the whole week. But what they do is encode the number plate into some encrypted key, which they can then allow us to track. So the trip data means we can follow that car through the whole day. Of course, it's different again with people, and they do recognise people because there's facial recognition, there's all sorts of methods for knowing where people are, things like use of credit cards. So there's loads of data sets that can track where people are, what they're doing. There's nothing, as far as I know, on informed consent, but there's the onus on the person collecting that data not to share personal data. And that responsibility ends when they die. And this is when the person, so data protection is about living individuals. So as soon as that person has passed away, you can share that data without any concern.
Anybody in the audience have an answer for that?
I can tell you something that came up on a walk we did.
Yeah, I knew he was going to say this.
We did a walk. It was the Bridlington walk actually, and there was some fascinating insights in terms of consent. And we were lucky to have a street where there was one sensor that was detecting MAC addresses, and then 50 metres down there was a massive CCTV camera with a big yellow sign. So we had a great conversation about informed consent and kind of, your device has just been detected, but you had no information there whatsoever. How do you feel about that? Okay, this is something that's been taking photos of your face for however long you've lived here. How do you feel about that? And one person, and I think Naomi probably knows the example I'm going to give, gave a really unusual response. And it is important to emphasise this is the minority. But they said, well, if I walk down the street shouting my name, I can't be upset if everybody knows my name. And their perception was very much that it was their device that was broadcasting this data. It wasn't the council's responsibility to make difficult, complex ethical decisions on what data they were collecting. It's the individual's responsibility to consider what data they're putting out there. Now, when that's your face, that's a lot more complicated. But if it's MAC address detection or similar, and this person in question would often turn their phone off, for example, for that very reason, and that would be them opting out. Now, that's a very unusual case, but I just thought it might be an interesting provocation.
We've got Jeremy next, I think. Jeremy had a question. Jeremy, do you? Oh, an answer. You've got an answer. Somebody's got an answer. Great.
Do people realistically have the option to just not use their phones in the modern day and age? I don't really think that it's like you can put that responsibility onto the user, but the entire society pressures you to have this device both socially, for work. It's not actually for emergency communications from the government. It's actually not a feasible response.
So are you saying actually that in effect, every time we take on another convenience, which a phone is, that we're accepting the loss of our own privacy?
So my question was actually going to be that, or my point was going to be that, the IoT should exist to serve people, right? It's a tool to make society and people's lives better. Without people, there's no reason for anything to exist. But there's always the concern when you add these more systems that people then just kind of have to passively adopt, particularly in public spaces, that there is no ability to be off the grid. And even if you want to be a disruptive user, should disruptive users still be serviced by the IoT? The people are still the point at the end of the day, not the system. And there's definitely a concern, I think, that, as you bring in more systems, you kind of continually litigate more ways that people have to act in order to accommodate the systems that should be accommodating them. I mean, it's the whole putting your, filling out 15 captchas a day to prove you're a human being online situation. Online should exist because you are a human that uses the systems, not so that you can prove to it that you are a person. Yeah, I don't like the idea of putting the onus on the people because they already have enough to deal with in the modern day and age, to be honest.
Right. Have we got some questions or some?
I was going to ask this question. Rick Chandler from UCL. One of the models that we have out there currently is China, where the people are monitored. They know they're monitored, so they do whatever they can to score their beneficial points system and hide away when they're doing naughty things. And I think that if we had a reward system that actually mimic that, we might have an opportunity. I don't know. What I was going to ask my question about was following on from what Liz says about her data being almost real time now, whether we're starting to use predictive analytics and make a cognitive city, because we could, rather than rely on past data and the data that is currently real time. I just wondered what you're looking at that.
That's what you were talking about, weren't you?
Yeah, it is, but it's how quickly, we're collecting that data and we probably have the ability to make decisions at a much more rapid pace than we have in the past, but how quickly those are being done is really unknown. I'm not seeing evidence that actually we're getting that adaptation placed into places. We're not doing that in places at the moment as well as we might.
Yes,
It
so
absolutely.
predictive analytics and the AI in the system could do a lot of that.
It could, but we're not using it with any...
Where is the security problems here? And are there some human and security issues in that predictive?
Yeah. Well, this is the misinformation. And as you say, it's also the gaps in information. So I've seen AI that's tried to say, well, are there genuine gaps in this data? Because the AI can expect to have some data about certain topics. And if they're missing, so like the misbehaviors, so people are like hiding the behaviors that they don't want the AI to detect, can the AI itself know that that's absent and flag that as a concern? This is where AI needs to get smarter and actually be thinking about where the gaps are in the data that should be there, and therefore worrying about prediction being more accurate if you've got a bigger picture.
But then are the humans out of the loop in the future then? And what is the risk of that?
No, because the humans are there because they're supporting the planning for the AI methods themselves. They're supporting it by the data they provide or the data they choose not to provide. The humans are very much part of that loop. And the minute we take them out, then I'll begin to get really worried.
Is it fair to assume that it's a very uneven city across which those sensors are deployed? Edinburgh has very wealthy areas and very poor areas. My worry is that there's a totally inconsistent model to which when to deploy sensors, and according to who owns those sensors, the interests on what the conflicts or the values are, and the flow of value in those, because some seem to be surveillance to prevent and impede crime, other ones to support affluent areas to sustain holding on to money. So I don't know if we can mirror very complex social environmental systems by simply saying we take this data and it becomes a digital twin, because it doesn't become a social, economic, environmental digital twin.
And that comes back to your values versus values and what you're getting out of it.
And actually, I mean, it raises a really big question about equity and inclusion, levelling up. I mean, all the agenda items that you hear on the politics, because actually the data we're collecting genuinely isn't always about addressing that problem. So how can we get data more to address those issues? I mean, that would be really, really helpful. Better for society.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yep. Oh, to Jeremy, and then.
Thank you. Yeah, really great panel discussion. Really a question aimed at Rachel, and talking about digital twins. So I've been working quite extensively on digital twins of different scales with various groups, and my understanding, the received definition would be a model that's updated at an appropriate rate from real-time data, essentially, and the model can improve with learning and so on and so forth. I was really interested in the way the citizens of Jersey, for example, would perceive the social economic benefit of maybe a more holistic digital twin, ultimately beyond the cycling piece, which I guess could feed into road management generally, because you're talking about citizen sensors almost, your 500 scientists. Could that be extended to motorists, for example, and are there other aspirations where social good could come out of sensorizing, if you like, society to improve well-being overall? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think since we last discussed this, Jeremy, that progress is quite slow. We're still very much at the beginning of that journey, and I think it's interesting to think about where these things might go. But the reality for us, and I'm sure many other places, is that we have some sets of data. We have big gaps. All of the data comes in a slightly different format. You look at, for example, just looking at the cyclists, we know we don't have a perfect demographic. We don't have a perfect representation of the island population. I happen to know that there is one cyclist who I'm friends with who's going around using his sensor a lot with for his training rides, and I need to strip him out of that data before we use it for anything useful. So you've got all these sort of different levels of granularity, and for us it's not an instant. We can't, we'd love to be doing real-time data, but we're a long way from that yet. We need to be sort of building up the different layers. Personally, I'm very keen for us to look at the next level, which is to start some sort of tracking motorists. We know that we don't have, I mean, the obvious way to do that would be to perhaps engage with Google or some of the car companies to access that data. I don't think that that's the right way to go from a trust perspective or a sort of local, building this thing for us. I think there are apps that we could deploy. I think we could build that into our data trust model so that we build the trust as we go. But it's a really slow progress, and it takes time, it takes investment, it takes people, it takes engagement with the population to do it. So we have this view of how it could be really beneficial, but back down on the ground, it's actually very, it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. We're far away from. Yeah.
Can I ask a question back to? I don't know the digital twin. I'm curious if you can only do a digital twin of dead things. In other words, you can't do a field. You think you can do a field, but fields might grow. Can you do a digital twin?
You can do a field.
Well,
we've got smart fields.
So
we've got smart potato fields.
Yeah, so I'm not sure you can, because in every potato is a seed. And what you can't do is preempt where it goes unless you employ Monsanto to control the level of that seed growth. So it's rather like asking the question, can you do a digital twin of a human?
Yes.
At what point do you snapshot you as an organic living and growing thing? I'm just curious.
A digital twin will always be a simplified model, won't it?
So it might be better to say we can count for dead things, such as aircraft. They're not living.
But why
No,
can't
no,
you do a
might
living?
be.
I don't understand why you can't do a living system.
You
Because
can.
I think
You
they
can.
change.
You can
organic.
do
They
it.
do, and that
They
is
do. But
exactly
you have
the point.
soil sensors, and you
Yeah.
have.
So which bit of my body do you choose to capture?
Whichever bit might be relevant. So I know there's research going on in UCL on digital twins, and
Yes.
it's about the human.
Humans,
So,
it is.
so you can monitor blood, temperature.
Fractions.
Yeah,
can see
you
fractions.
basic, but you can see all.
Yeah, all the
you're
things.
monitoring different
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
That's the next piece of research I want to do is the human digital twin.
Sorry, I was
It's
gonna-
accurate.
I was
It's
just
just-
gonna-
Yeah,
So how many-
no, hold on a minute. We've got somebody down there. This is getting very exciting. Here.
So all models are wrong,
Yes.
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if it's a model of a dead thing or a living thing, because it's what you call a dead thing isn't dead. There's no such thing as a dead thing. An aircraft deteriorates. An aircraft uses fuel. I use fuel. I deteriorate. You know, it's exactly the same. And it's just, they're all snapshots, but it's at certain levels of granularity, at certain levels of fidelity, and all models are wrong, but they're the best we've got.
Hey, there you
I'm
go.
not- I don't
Hey,
believe you.
all models are wrong,
I
but
think
they're
what you do
models.
is project a very platonic idea of the world can be frozen and captured.
Yeah.
It's good for decision making.
Right, we've got a
but
few
we
more
choose
minutes.
We choose to miss out many
I
things.
think we can carry on
Sorry.
discussing this over lunch. We've got a question down
Hi.
here.
Sorry, just going to move away from the digital twins of bodies. So I'd like to build up on Liz's point on skills, capabilities, and adaptive infrastructure. And historically, I would say that probably mission critical systems are not quite adaptive. We're still stuck in legacy computers that are older than us and run on Windows XP, and that's for very good reasons of reliability, safety, and so on. So I'm wondering whether there's like some sort of a cultural clash when we've got all those, innovators being disruptive, introducing digital twin sensors in those places that are, fundamentally built to not change that often. So can I ask you, whether you experience that cultural clash, and how do people resolve those tensions between old and new?
Right, this reminds me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, so what we do, we tend to build on what we've already got. So you can put new layers. I mean, we've seen this particularly with technology. So we have proprietary solutions, and then we have like a modern user interface. But then those exactly open up the gaps, the concerns, the pet trust concerns about privacy, security, ethics, and all the rest of it, because those become like ways that you can drive through or tunnel through. Into functionality that you might not be able to or should not be able to access in the fundamental system. So you can actually, through a new user interface, make the system do something you didn't intend for it to be doing. So it becomes a vulnerability. But we tend not to replace, and this is exactly the challenge, is how can we intelligently put that new knowledge on? And do we always have to add on? And can we not think this is the right time to actually say, no, what we've got is not going to be good enough. We have to replace.
And I would say we have some areas where this is quite critical. Say the NHS. The NHS has got a whole legacy of old systems we're trying to update. And it reminds me of the marketing thing about early adopters and laggards. There's a whole lot of early adopters around there, and they're using the most sophisticated technology, and we're all getting excited about what's happening. But the whole population is laggards, really, with laggard technology, and we really haven't looked at that as much as we should be doing, really, I think. And local authorities and places will need to look at that, as well as the ageing of the technology they're putting in place anyway, and what I call the use, management and maintenance. Often when you're designing something, you design it for this wonderful thing that's going to be in place, this new thing. And people don't design for use, management and maintenance. Whether it's a garden, a park or a building, they forget that over the time scale. And I think more designing or thinking about that use, management and maintenance is going to be critical.
And end of life.
And end of life, yeah.
Circular economy.
Yeah. I think we have to come to a halt now because we've got our last speaker, and so I'd like to thank my panel very much for an interesting discussion. We've just got going.
Good. Yeah.